This is Colonial Puppet, and a while ago I bought a Macintosh 512KE, also known as the Macintosh 512K Enhanced, off of eBay along with some peripherals for a grand total of about $2.25 plus shipping. And while it looks identical to the original 512K released in 1984, the 512KE was actually released in April of 1986 as a cheaper alternative to the then top-of-the-line Macintosh Plus. The 512K Enhanced had double the ROM of the original 512K, bringing it from 64 kilobytes to 128 kilobytes, and also had an 800K double-sided floppy disk drive as opposed to the original's 400K single-sided floppy disk drive. My Mac came with an external 800K floppy disk drive, a third-party pointing device by Microspeed Incorporated called a Mac Track, and an original Macintosh keyboard model M0110. Unfortunately, the keyboard was almost completely destroyed during shipping, and the unit itself received some cosmetic damage as well. Fortunately, the pointing device survived shipping with no visible damage and was responsive when I plugged it into the computer. However, the cursor seemed to want to gravitate towards the bottom right corner of the screen to the point where it was unusable. The external floppy drive also appeared as though it survived shipping, but turned out to be dead. As for the Macintosh itself, the internal floppy disk drive turned out to be dead, and when I turned on the machine for the first time, I got the Macintosh chime, but nothing displayed on the CRT. However, I realized that I could get a brief image if I were to hit the machine. I later read that this could be caused by aging, cracked solder joints on certain places of the analog board, but after doing some resoldering and turning the computer back on, I got no picture at all, and I also heard a concerning high-pitched noise coming from somewhere on the analog board. Overall, it seemed as though this computer was stored for a very long time in a damp garage or basement, given the amount of corrosion and dirt on it and its peripherals. Now, this was all almost a year ago, and I haven't made a video on this restoration project since, but as you can see, the 512KE is almost completely restored. So I thought I'd take the time to make this update video on how I got to this point, starting with the pointing device. This device was the easiest to fix, as it turns out it only needed to be cleaned. It was filled with dirt and debris that was interfering with the way that the components track the movement of the trackball, so once this was cleaned it worked perfectly. I have yet to fix the original keyboard and have instead broken it down into its individual parts while separating the good keys and keycaps from the broken ones, which turns out to be a near even split. I might end up fixing this keyboard in the future if I can find replacement key switches and keys or a donor keyboard for a good price, or I might end up just selling the individual parts. But for now I decided to replace it with the model M0110A keyboard that originally shipped with the Macintosh Plus. It isn't the model that would have come with the 512KE, and mine isn't perfect. It is missing the 5 key and has a broken key switch to match, but it works just fine with the computer, and it's a lot more repairable than the keyboard I started off with. I've also yet to fix the external floppy disk drive, but this is just because I've had very little time to give it any attention, with the exception of a good cleaning. I spent most of my time on the computer itself and trying to get it fully restored, and for the most part I was successful. It has a working CRT and internal floppy disk drive again, and the only thing I really have to worry about now is replacing its PRAM battery and doing something about the crack in the upper left-hand corner of the case, though there's not much I can do about that other than buying a whole new front face for the computer. I'm now going to describe the process I went through in fixing this Macintosh, starting with its CRT and analog board. I started by testing the tube itself in my Macintosh SE to see if it was good, and it was. I then thought that the problem could be coming from a faulty CRT tube socket connector, but after replacing this, the problem of no picture and a buzzing noise was still there. I then thought that the problem could be coming from a bad flyback transformer, as the capacitors on the analog board seemed to be in good shape with no bulging or leaking. This turned out to be the case, and after swapping out the bad flyback with a working one from my Macintosh SE, the CRT sprung to life with a bright and clear picture. And as for the internal floppy disk drive, my Macintosh SE was also kind enough to donate its working 800K floppy disk drive. I know that's a bit anticlimactic, but I do plan on doing a video in the future about repairing the one that it came with. Now, I'm kind of mad at myself for not filming the process of replacing the flyback transformer, as it was my first big soldering project, so to end this video on a more interesting note, I decided to film the process of me putting in a new flyback transformer for my Macintosh SE. This is one that I got as new old stock on eBay. I started by laying the computer flat on its face and removing the 4 T15 Torx screws with my Mac cracker. After that, I was able to lift off the back casing. As you can see, this is where the flyback would be connecting to the tube. Now this would normally be the part where I discharged the CRT, but since I don't have to do that because there's no flyback transformer to disconnect, I just unplugged the CRT tube socket connector. And here's where the new flyback transformer is going to go on the analog board. Next I removed this protective covering from the back side of the analog board. Now it took quite a bit of slight bending and adjusting, but I was finally able to get the new flyback transformer to fit through the holes of the board. Next, after making sure that the flyback was sitting flush on the board, I fired up the soldering iron and soldered each of the contacts. Then the last thing to do was to connect the flyback to the tube itself, which was a little tricky given that this flyback was new old stock and had not yet been used or broken in. After turning on the computer to see if the replacement was a success, I was happy to see a picture display on the screen. However, I did notice a very slight flicker. It was so subtle that the camera could barely pick it up. However, after foolishly discharging my CRT without first disconnecting the logic board, and after doing some minor adjustments to my soldering job, I was able to remove this flickering and get a nice clean picture. And thankfully neither the logic board or the hard drive seemed to be damaged by my CRT discharge. And so then the only thing left to do was to completely reassemble the computer. And like I said, I took the floppy disk drive out of this computer to put it in the Macintosh 512KE, so this computer still does not have a working floppy disk drive, which is alright since it has a hard disk drive, but like I said, I have 2 broken floppy disk drives that I'd like to fix and make videos on soon. So look out for that in the future, and I hope you found this video to be entertaining. And other than that, this has been Colonial Puppet. Have a nice day.